Hi, welcome to a new episode of Hello World. So today we are going to talk about the concept of smart cities. And I actually came across that concept, or the definition, or the concept smart city about, say, 3-4 years ago when I worked with a company within security. And I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of companies involved in the concept. And it's quite fascinating to think about connecting a whole city and getting all that data that you can use then to create services for the citizens. But you also need to consider sort of the magnitude of that, because you have politics, where you maybe change politicians every 4th year. You have different stakeholders, different companies, and they all play a different role in this, and they obviously all have different agendas. And not the least, you need to think about the ethics of data. So this is what we're going to talk about today.
Do you think Malmö is a smart city, where we are located in?
I don't know if we actually have a smart city concept for Malmö. I don't think there is one defined.
Let's see.
That's something we need to explore.
Yeah, we have invited a real expert in the area today when it comes to smart cities. His name is Mehmet Gulez, and he's located in Istanbul in Turkey. He has been working with many different projects when it comes to this topic. Nowadays, he's an associated partner at Ernst & Young Consulting, and he's, among other things, is leading innovation services. So welcome, Mehmet.
Hello, welcome. How are you?
We're fine. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you in Hello World.
Thank you. The term smart cities, we have come and get in touch with it sometimes during the years in business life, and the way people are talking about it and companies are approaching it seems to be very different from time to time. Can you describe or define smart city, a smart city or smart cities?
I will try to, because it's a very, very wide term now. As you said, every company has different way of approaching to the subject right now. It started with this smart cities, triggered from the technology transformation in many countries. Then it's been discussed as intelligent communities or future cities now, because the concept is far beyond than being smart actually within itself. Well, what we can say the term smart city is actually think of a city which has a certain nervous system and a body and a mind, which is sort of merged with digital and analog infrastructures to serve for the communities of the prosperity and the welfare of the communities. So it's actually a network of technologies, network of people, and network of societies and the cooperation. So it's actually an environment which is a living environment. It's like a body itself, and it's an organism, and you need to sort of communicate and to make this society interconnected so that it has a better quality of life, more efficient, and more, let's say, in a better living environment for the world. So that's what we can say as a smart city in a nutshell. However, when you search in Google what smart city, it usually comes with from technology companies. First definitions are coming from the technology companies, and usually it is nowadays it's heavily related with IoT, because it's the first base that you enter to the smart city area. However, we need to look at it from a wider perspective about, are we creating a long-term value perspective rather than the technology or the infrastructure perspective, because this term is formed out of 4 layers. So only the first layer is formed out of the major technologies which we talk on IoT. Then we talked about the second layers, which is the connection layer, where we connect these devices. The third layer is like the middle layer in technologies, where these sort of data is merged and starts to become available for any application. And then we have the fourth layer, which is actually the sort of the front end of the city, of the apps and the services. So it's not actually only a matter of technology, but it's also a matter of design, matter of process, and like every organization. So that's what we can call a smart city. It's a combination of all these together, and we can sort of assemble these. Like, we can, first layer could be our first senses, where we touch things, where we receive things from, where we grab things from, okay? The second layer we can talk about is like the nervous system, where things started to sort of get interconnected and send communication between each other. The third part we can sort of like, it's our like backbone. It's like our, sort of where things start to get together, where the nerves get together and start to, accumulate to other areas of the body and the organs. And finally, the fourth layer could be, considered as the brain, where it actually commands everything, or where it actually receives everything, where we smell and taste or whatever and hear things. Yeah. So these are sort of, if we sort of try to give you like an analogy of a smart city, we can actually combine it with a living organism of human body or animals or however, but it depends on how well structured is this infrastructure.
Yeah. You have had assignments from the Turkish government, and you have also been very involved in the transformation in your city as well. Could you give a practical example how this will, the experience around this for a person living there or working there? Could you pick one typical example?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are many applications that are, we are utilizing in our lives, especially the navigators that we use in the mobility of, your sort of navigation tools that we are using in our daily lives is one of the earliest sort of applications that started to occur. Istanbul is one of the earliest ones where we use the sort of the traffic control videos and start to accumulate the video recordings, and then start counting the cars in every video, and then from that link it to a geographical mapping structure of the city, and then start to showing how loaded the traffic is, because the traffic is the most key thing in Istanbul, where 20 million people is living. It's a small landscape, so you need to squeeze people into this really terrific city, where you need to start to find new solutions to solve these problems. So especially but it all depends actually. All these practices starts not from the technology, because that's the traditional method, but it needs to start from the value creation. Okay, it needs to start from the desirability part, where there is a problem, where there's a challenge, that needs to be triggered. Same thing happened in I'm giving another example, which started and initiated in 1994 in the toll collection systems of the city for bus ticketing and all the mobility vehicles, where Istanbul started to use tokens, digital tokens, in order to collect the payments, and also doing the wallet collections of the citizens. And it was a metal device that is used for the security people to just give an RFID signal that they were actually controlling these spots. So they took that technology and then merged it with the payment system and started in 1994. This was the earliest, actually, the modern digital toll fare collection system in the world, even before London or any other more advanced city transportation systems. So it's because of it all started because of fraud, because there was a huge fraud in the ticketing. There was a huge sort of black market of bus tickets, which was very easy to produce, and it was creating overcrowded population, which was uncontrolled. So they put the validators into all the bus system in the city, which actually resulted as one of the most advanced tolling systems of major cities. And now that technology transformed into a subsidiary company of the Istanbul municipality, and that company is now exporting its technology to other countries. So it's actually created more additional values than it was designed for. So to give you just a quick and very practical example of implementations.
Great.
So what are the sort of the mega trends that are sort of affecting, because I mean smart cities are popping up everywhere, and of course it's digitization, but I'm assuming that there are other mega trends driving that more and more cities are getting into this, and that the applications that you actually do are different depending on those trends as well.
Exactly. Actually, you know, we need to, when we talk about the mega trends, that is actually triggering everything we live in. It's we need to look at the primary forces, you know, that actually triggers everything that we are actually going through. One of them is, of course, you know, we need to actually do not miss the shift of this, of course, disruption period. So cities need to catch up this wave in order to sort of enhance the way they operate and they serve to their communities. The second thing is, from my point of view, we need to invest into our, you know, we have scarce resources, okay? We have limited resources. We need to invest very cleverly. And from that, we need to create value. So there are like these three areas that we should not, as city officials or city people or corporates or people operating in our cities, even at homes, we need to be quite aware of these challenges. But what is causing those challenges is, you know, we can split them into maybe four. One of them is, of course, the demographics. So the demographic is changing, okay? Generation Z is coming, and it's going to be the most crowded, community in the century. And their habits are totally changed, totally different, more reactive, more responsive. And these communities are actually happening in more developing economies where it's actually the population is also more crowded in the cities because of the need of protection, need of welfare, need of prosperity, and so forth. So people are migrating to the biggest cities. There's a huge urbanization, and Generation Z people are actually more on those countries and those cities. Yeah. So we need to take a huge look at the perspective of the Generation Z. And in more developed countries, there's an aging population. So demographics is and there's a huge behavioral change as well. So behavioral economics, we should not, you know, sort of forget about it. And the period that we are, you know, going through have already proven that there is, in case of these kind of urgencies or changes and trends, actually people start to change the way they behave in certain usages. So that's one area. The second thing is, of course, the globalization. Globalization in the sense of oppositely, because of the trade wars and tariff wars, let's say, there will be a shrink in the global economy, for sure. So every country will start, from a more nationalistic perspective, start to compete between themselves. There was always competition, but collaboration was more open when the tariffs were more or less. Yeah. So there will be a huge investment to technology in every country. So cities needs to sort of become the platform by, you know, serving its data and serving its platform to, you know, sort of being those technologies used and developed from their environment. Another point is, of course, let's say the environment, which we should not forget. Because we have limited resources, there is huge of climate change. The oceans are now, you know, the sea levels are rising very rapidly, and this is going to cause floods in major cities, which is going to actually cause of a migration to inner parts of the countries. So some cities with low population might be having higher populations in the coming years.
Yeah, that's right.
And cities need to sort of start preparation already, which is already late, especially in some countries where they have big, you know, next to oceans, and they have huge, you know, sort of seashores. They're already having huge flood problems even today, and that's also a danger to the freshwater resources. So cities sort of need to innovate and find ways to protect themselves from these environmental issues, and also, you know, to protect our resources. So because otherwise we will not be talking about the cities, because in area where we live, in Turkey, is also will be the south part of our region, which Syria, Turkey, Iraq, or what these regions are also now in the danger of desertization. So people are actually the food resources are now also scarce as well. So, which we were not afraid of 1,000 years, because these lands were the lands of the agriculture, even the beginning of humanity. So, so this is going to be a huge cause of people moving. Even in Syria, one of the causes of the war is actually counted as this desertization. And the final one is, of course, technology. Technology in the sense of the communication will be faster for sure after 5G, and even though it's 6G, these are all now becoming realities. The exchange of data will be faster and faster than we can even imagine, and this is going to bring other source of capabilities to cities to develop things on top of itself. Edge computing, quantum computing, so these will be regular way of doing business. So these technologies will be quite very viable in the coming years. Now it's not that viable. So cities needs to sort of consider about when the data is faster, when the infrastructure is cheaper, when the storage of energy like battery technologies will be cheaper. How we can help the citizens to keep the resources of the city for a long-term perspective. So I think technology, these 4 pillars, is going to really, as the primary forces, going to change the way the cities operate.
Yeah.
There are other, subsections of every prime forces, but it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe we can afterwards.
It sounds like a good idea to have a smart city strategy as a city. And I can imagine that it's a big difference between different cities having that.
Yeah, of course, depending where they are. Yeah.
So, can you give an example of a city that has come a long way on this journey, and what's defining them?
I mean, there are many cities that have been working on this globally, like, for instance, London. In your country, I know Stockholm has, I don't know if Malmö has, but I do think that, they are also linked with national strategies as well. So we need to consider it as in different layers.
Yeah.
So there are now, especially starting and triggered from UN, there is an initiative called Sustainable Development Goals, which actually already identified that every, community, every city needs to be aligned with these 17 priority goals in order to have a much sustainable world to have. Yeah. So countries started to become aligning with these sustainable development goals, and from that goals, everybody is now refreshing their strategies. So this is one area that actually, from a national perspective, that is triggering. Even in Turkey now, our president have recently announced that every city must have a smart city strategy in place. India has initiated this, as you know, 100 smart cities. So as a country, as a national strategy, they initiated that all these cities needs to have some standard of infrastructure, so that it will be easier for the country to serve 4 billion people. China as well, it's one of the fastest rapidly transforming countries, its infrastructure, in order to compete in the global area. Singapore in the Asia Pac is a country, it actually focuses on this domain heavily. On the west side, as I told you, London was one of the first initiators. New York is now heavily investing on this, and some other areas are doing some portions of these smart city initiatives from different angles, because it's affecting many different areas. From a strategy perspective, what we did in Istanbul, we did the strategy work for the city of Istanbul, and its approach was actually to understand what's happening globally on the landscape. Usually, this should be one of the ways to see the latest trends and the latest literature, because it's every day refreshing, every day a new technology coming up. So the strategy should be built on top of, with a future perspective. From that, inputs, you need to sort of get everybody collectively into one room, and there I will tell in maybe in detail. But the city needs to have a long-term perspective rather than a short-term perspective. However, in a political environment where the mayors are coming with elections for limited periods, it's not that easy to set a long-term vision for a mayor, because you need to have outcomes in a shorter period. So that's why in Istanbul we try to sort of link the vision and the mission of the smart city strategy with a purpose definition. So why do we need to become a smart city? So that definition is by methodology is giving you a longer frame and longer period that can sustain for the new refreshed strategies to find its North Star. Otherwise, if you don't have a purpose to become a smart city, you might not become, or you might not sustain as a smart city in the future. So, so from a good practical perspective, we call it the purposeful cities. Sorry of my pronunciation, but we call it purposeful cities because we believe in the city has its own purpose, and usually that carries out the message for other mayors, other nations, and generations. Yeah. So this is what we tried. It was an sort of a methodology that our company has used in other areas. So we try to implement it in a smart city strategy project, and we think it's useful. And now we see actually the outcome of it, because the mayor have changed in Istanbul recently, and our strategy was just being published the year before the new mayor, and the new mayor is now implementing most of the actions on the action plan. And very rapidly. So the city now have declared to become an open city on data. So Istanbul is now opening its data platform, which was a rare thing in Turkey, but it's going to be popular in the coming years. And it's good to see that the strategy that you build in have some outputs and outcomes in a short term, because when you look in a long-term perspective, the strategy, especially in these large investment infrastructures, it's not that easy to create the long-term benefit. No, but exactly. If you start from the value creation, and from that value creation, if you go to the business requirements, and from that to go to the technical requirements, then you start to get the outcomes. But in a typical strategical work, what we see and what we were seeing before, that the cities were not actually approaching to these initiatives from an innovative perspective, but they were more looking at a transactional perspective. So they were just looking at the benchmarks, looking at similar case studies, and trying to procure those technologies that happened and worked elsewhere. Yeah. But this is, as I told you, these primary, megatrends and, the change agents of communities are acting differently in different geographies. Yeah. So you need to look at the citizens or the visitors of the city and their needs. And from that perspective, you need to bring out new solutions as a pipeline. Yeah. So from that strategy, you need to go to a roadmap. And that roadmap should be consisting of different layers in each pillar. But it needs to be multidimensional. So you cannot do it in one dimensional. So what we advise usually to go in like 4 steps. So you do the value discovery. You secondly do the monetization perspective. And then you do the business requirements and technology requirements that sets the tone, usually in that flow. And if you say, in smart cities, there are certain dimensions, usually in the methodology. In Europe, it's, at a macro level, it has 6 dimensions. And in other countries, in Istanbul, for instance, we use 11 dimensions. Depending on every city, you can use different domains, depending on your priorities and challenges. It's like mobility, like waste management, like energy, like economy, like living, and so forth. So it has these kind of dimensions. So you need to first prioritize which dimensions you will go for as a municipality manager to build your action plans and strategies. The secondly, after building your area, then you need to look at it from which areas that I'm going to focus my strategy. Am I going to utilize my existing operations or innovate on my existing operations? Am I going to allocate a new budget to boost that area, or am I going to prepare or change my existing regulations or prepare a new one, because sometimes regulations block these kind of changes, and finally, am I going to sort of put a vision, announce my vision so that everybody aggregates and comes up to one platform to innovate for the city. So these are the areas that actually the city officials should think about, and then start building on a pipeline, and then doing it on a multi-channel, multi-dimensional model, so that the impact, the change on the long term start to occur. Because if you do it on only one single layer, let's say only on mobility, you will be just sorting out a problem of the people who are using the transportation day to day. But you might be not considering your elder people or your younger generations that are not on the road but that are having other challenges. So it needs to be inclusive, it needs to be multidimensional, and it needs to be focused always on these sustainable development goals. So when you are building a strategy, you need to consider these components into it. And we are now change our methodology. We build it on top of the sustainable development goals, and every dimension has a different portion of the development goals. So we try to monitor them. And this is the last section. After your roadmap of this multidimensional roadmap, you need to have a way of sort of a monitoring perspective to monitor the impacts and monitor the change, so that you go and reverse and then do a better version of what you have achieved in the beginning. So I think these are
sounds very easy.
I mean, as a sort of an official of a city, this is a very challenging job, because you have very different dimensions, very different expectations. And as I tried to tell you in the beginning, these mega trends are coming towards you very rapidly. So you need to be very well aware of what's happening around, not only your jurisdiction, but globally, because you might be finding, as we had in this case, Syrians sitting in front of your border, 4 million people joining to your country, over a 5 month, 6 month period, then you need to really do something serious. And it's not only coming from technology. As I told you, it's a smart city. We should not only think of it from a digital perspective. It's a blend of physical and digital.
Of course.
So we need to call it like the phygital environment. So it's the analogs sometimes become much smarter than the digital ones in some area and in some uncertain periods.
So all of this involves a lot of data, obviously, and as a citizen, I would be maybe concerned sometimes. How are you using the data, and what are the ethics behind it? How do we ensure that you feel safe about how that's going to be used? So you're not. I mean, there is always a scare about Big Brother monitoring you and using it in different matters, and not all countries are maybe as democratic or open like Sweden are, for example. So how do you think about the ethics? How do you sort of get people to feel safe to leave the traces and so on as well?
So, I mean, as I told you in the strategy part, there are different roles for different players. So from a national perspective, there are some regulations that protects the data, which is like GDPR in European Union, and in some other countries. In my country, we have an alignment with GDPR, and we have also a separate data privacy law that's in place, which protects the rights of the individuals and corporates and the employees, everybody, every citizen. So as a municipality, you don't have so much playing room that you can go against these laws. Okay, so you need to ethically and regulatively, you need to be aligned with these regulations. Second, sort of the protection element, and from an ethical perspective as well, is your purpose. Because if you define your purpose in an inclusive way, and if you define it boldly, then it actually gives the comfort and gives the security to the citizen that you actually work in the right manners, with the right ethical behaviors, and with the focus and aim to create a value for them. So if it's if this is well designed and it is well digested, and internalized by the officials of the city and whomever is working with this data. Because when we are talking about open data structures, of course, it is aligned with the laws and regulations, but there will be other users of this data as well, like the third parties, like technology companies, like startups, or big corporations, or even other cities. So they should be also in line with those ethical standards, which is protected by national regulations and also by trade agreements. So your agreements and your contracts of sharing these protocols is also quite crucial. So you need to sort of design the way that you actually open your APIs, exchange those APIs, and monitor them the way that it's being used. So if you miss out these elements, then there might be ethical areas or cyber areas as well. So you might be open to some dangers.
Exactly.
So unethical attacks can come against that open environment.
Thank you so much, Mehmet, for giving us an introduction to the smart city concept. It's been really interesting to find out more and how you, as a company, address these questions as well. And I guess the essence of it is really to have a great why you're doing it, and then things will evolve, not by itself, but along the way at least. So thank you for joining us.
It was a great pleasure for me as well to become a part of Hello World. I wish your messages will also create the butterfly effect in other parts of the world.
Thanks a lot. Too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
It sounds like things you are working with when it comes to, it's the middle of your street, design thinking, innovation, and proof of concepts and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot about innovation. It's actually quite interesting because we were interviewing. Before we do these interviews, we have a pre-meeting where we meet our guests and discuss what we're going to talk about and so. And yesterday we actually had a pre-meeting with one of our guests coming on a later episode, and we were talking about hackathons and the need to have open data, and she was really saying that it's difficult because a lot of open data is not available, and that's sort of stopping the innovation pace. It's interesting to hear that if the smart city concepts are sort of they're becoming more and more, and it's going faster, then that problem might solve itself as well.
It's a statement how they're going to provide data.
Yeah, and then we'll have sort of a drive of innovation.
So if you are running a Starbucks cafe or something else, to providing a free network, free Wi-Fi is not to being a smart city.
No, it's not.
You have to go further than that.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.